to another episode of The Amanda Hill Show. Hey everyone, this is Amanda and welcome to episode number 10 of The Amanda Hill Show. It's a bit of a celebration today. I feel like 10 episodes deserves some sort of celebration. So here we are. Today I'm bringing you a conversation about boundaries. So yes, let's talk about boundaries, bitches. I hope no one is offended by my language. It is 2018, so as we know, it's quite easy to offend someone, lol. So let's be clear. It's like, you know, when you get to that stage with a friend where shit stirring is how you show your love for them. Let's just establish that that's where we're at now. Before we get into today's conversation, I wanted to let you all know that my group mentoring program, which is starting on 15th of October, called The Empowered Woman, there is one available spot left. And I have the most beautiful group of women, like next level, joining me for this 3-month journey. If you are looking to really integrate some of this work and some of the themes I'm talking about into your life, this is sort of a perfect opportunity to connect in with a tribe of women who are also on this same path and who are basically here waiting to support and celebrate you on your journey. To me, this program is a real chance to explore this upgraded definition of sisterhood, where we rise together. So if you are craving that connection with some soulies, that spot might be yours. If you'd like some more details, you can head to my website, www.amandahill.com.au, click on the Work With Me tab, and then The Empowered Woman. How about I just put it in the show notes, as well. So anyway, you'll find it. Have a read through. If it sings to your heart, you just fill in the form on the website, and I'll be in touch to organise a time to chat with you so that we can make sure it's the perfect fit. So super excited that that is coming up. I will be running another round of it next year. I know that some of you were super keen but just didn't line up. We always trust that. It's always in perfect timing. So I was going to share with you on Saturday night, I went to a live music gig that my housemate organised. She's so awesome. Anyway, a beautiful gal, she'll be listening in, so hello to Mika. She came up to me, introduced herself. She's been listening to the podcast. This is always such a mind fuck for me when I understand that there's people that I know who are listening in, but when someone comes up who I don't know, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're listening to the podcast. It's amazing. She was telling me how she couldn't believe how much each episode is speaking to her, exactly what, she might be working on at that point in time, or it's just resonating so much. And I'm so stoked because that's exactly how I want it to feel. And this is what happens when I'm just sharing what I'm working on, because no doubt the collective is also moving through those themes as well. So we are definitely all on this journey together, and we're all co-creating this. So it's really special. Today's conversation comes from something that has popped back up for me, and I've noticed it as a theme with my mentoring clients over the last few weeks, which is boundaries. Another confirmation that I had that this was the conversation I was to speak to for this episode was that I was holding an oils circle on the weekend, and we're showing the ladies the Emotions and Essential Oils book, and basically each page has a description of an oil and what the emotional or energetic meaning around that oil is. And I was explaining, it can be like how you use your tarot cards. Like you can just open to a page and read the meaning, and often it's very resonant. As I was explaining this, I opened to a page and it was tea tree, which is the oil of energetic boundaries. And I just started laughing. I was like, this is so funny because this is what I'm about to share in my podcast. So it was a beautiful little confirmation. So when I was recovering from chronic fatigue, which I spoke all about in episode 1, the therapy I did called Mickle therapy, it had 3 main keys to it, and this is what my therapist walked me through integrating into my life. The 3 keys were number 1, communicating effectively with others; number 2, setting appropriate boundaries; and number 3, finding joy. And basically every day when I was really healing myself, I was working with one or all of these to improve my physical health. And they're actually still integrating all the time, and I'm still learning about these, and I often go back to them because they're like real anchors for me. When something's up, I'm like, okay, which key is it? Like, which is it? One of them? Is it all 3? Like, what do I need to work on? Yeah, when I was first learning them, I had to really reassess all of my boundaries because basically the short version is that I had none, and that was part of what made me really unwell. It's really hard for me to explain, like when I'm working with a mentoring client, how important boundaries are, because to me they're so important because I watched how when I had no boundaries, the effect it had on my health and on my happiness. But it's really hard if you haven't had that direct experience. But I think everyone can relate to when a boundary is crossed and then feeling funky afterwards, right? To me, boundaries is a real self-care 101. It's like, it's the grit, you know? So we always see about, like bubble baths and getting massages. Like, I love that shit. But also to me, like boundaries is really getting in and getting your hands dirty, like doing the work. And this is where things get interesting because it's a real challenge sometimes to establish boundaries, maintain boundaries, be flexible in boundaries sometimes, like all those things. It is hard to navigate, but you see massive reward for honouring your boundaries. Compromise everything from like the boundary we set around how much sleep we need to get, like how much time we spend on social media, to relationships. And I'm going to really speak to relationships a lot in this episode. Like for me, boundaries are not just around protecting time and the relationship with ourselves. They're also about protecting the most meaningful relationships in our life. Like a practical example of this, when I had chronic fatigue, I would like push on and be at everyone's beck and call, which was what was also making me sick. And then when I had like a breakdown or episode or like anxiety attack, it was always like Matt or my parents like having to look after me. And it makes me sad now because I would spread myself so thin that they didn't get to see as much of the happy side. Like I didn't give to them as much as I gave to like every other person in my life. But they were always the ones like picking up the pieces after I'd tended to everyone else. So I don't know, I think it's a really important thing to think about. Like, it's also important to acknowledge that boundaries evolve over time, and it's always something I'm reassessing. Like, things change, people change, relationships break down, new relationships form, like our energy changes, so we need to adjust accordingly. And I guess what we have to talk about first is the relationship with ourselves, because without a connection, a love and a respect for yourself, it's going to be very hard to set boundaries because you're always going to value others more than what you value yourself. I know when I was first establishing boundaries, it was kind of a fake it till you make it situation because I really didn't feel comfortable doing it, but I was so keen to make myself well that I was like, I'm just going to give this a shot. Like, even though I hated having, I really didn't want to have boundaries, but I was like, okay, it's like an experiment. Yeah, I'll see what happens when I do set the boundaries. And when I saw the reward for doing so, then I had the visceral, tangible experience of, okay, this is actually worthwhile, you know? And that connection with yourself is really valuable because when you establish boundaries, you open yourself up to be judged by another person for doing that. Like, they may not value boundaries, or they may be surprised if you've never established a boundary with them before. What I want to make note of here is that if we don't set any boundaries, we open ourselves up to be walked all over. Like, it's not other people's responsibility, it's our own responsibility. And some boundaries are set and we need to be really firm with them. And then sometimes we can be flexible with them, okay, because it's life, so it doesn't always look perfect and it's not always black and white. There are some that are black and white. I'll give you another example here. So this can really play out in a work environment. Like, at the start of this year, I said to myself, I'm not going to work hospitality because I need my weekends to see Matt and visit my family. And when I started at the crystal shop, I said straight up, like, I need most weekends off because of this. And I was a little bit flexible in that it's a really small team and we share the weekends throughout the month, so no one has to do all of them. So I work one, occasionally 2 Saturdays a month for a few hours, and I'm happy with this. Like, I communicated the boundary I needed to at the start and then was able to have the discussion and come to something that felt good for me. And because I'd explained why straight up, then there's already that understanding. Like, if I hadn't have expressed this initially, maybe they would have just expected that I was available every weekend, or maybe they would have just put me on without knowing, because it's my responsibility, to set that boundary. It's not for someone else to guess or read my mind. And it's so interesting to watch because, we get pissed off when someone oversteps our boundaries, but, a lot of the time we haven't even communicated to them clearly what our boundary was. So then we just hold on to all this built up anger, how could they not know? And it's like, well, you didn't tell them. How were they meant to know? So last week I went through with one of my mentoring clients, a visual representation of the relationships in our life. And so if you want to reflect on your boundaries, I'd really recommend this exercise. All you need is a piece of paper and a pen. And it's really helpful for those of you who, like me, like to see the visual, and you see it on paper, then you're like, okay, it can kind of make a bit more sense. So what you do is you get the piece of paper, you draw. And you can do this in your mind now if you're, driving or whatever you're doing. You draw a circle in the center of the page, and then you draw another circle further out, and then you keep going out and out, okay? I explained it like, you know how Jupiter, the planet, has... yes, the planet, what else is Jupiter, has the rings around it. So imagine that you are Jupiter. Jupiter's fucking massive, okay? And then there's all the rings around. Now, yeah, so you are Jupiter. The first ring out is your inner circle, okay? So these are the most important people to you. And then the next circle you go out, people a bit further out, and then so on and so on. Now, this is going to look different for everyone, obviously. For the sake of the example, I'll share with you what mine is. So Jupiter's me. My next circle, closest, most important people to me, is Matt and my sister. Okay? And then the next circle out is my mum, my dad, probably 3 of my soulies, like my soul sisters. And then further out would be like a few of my really close family friends. And then further out and further out. And you keep going out and out. And when you do this visual diagram, it's really helpful to be like, okay, well, where am I spending most of my energy? Because sometimes we don't even realize, but we're making time for someone who's fucking sitting at like Pluto over the person who is like closest to Jupiter. Yeah, like we all do this from time to time. So I often will come back to this diagram and I'll be like, okay, like who's most important? Well, I'm most important first and foremost because that relationship with myself forms the basis for every other relationship. So I have to look after me first, and then from there, the overflow goes to the next circle, and then the next circle, etc. Okay? So that can be a really helpful little exercise. Another thing that helps me connect with boundaries is the wild woman archetype from Adore Your Cycle. I spoke all about the menstrual cycle work in episode 8. But basically, I've noticed like in my premenstrual time, I'm able to be super honest with myself. And if any boundaries have been overstepped, the wild woman within me is like, Mandy, fix this shit. Like, I'm not going to put up with this. And I'm like, yeah, I know. She is that side, or he, you know. We all have a wild woman or wild man within us. And they're that side that's like, do I look like I give a fuck, you know? And they generally give less fucks about everyone else, which is a good energy to tap into from time to time, especially if you're like me and generally give way too many fucks. And so everyone's boundaries will look different because everyone is different. We've established that, yeah? That's clear. Even just whether you have more of a tendency for extroversion or introversion. Again, like the definition of this being where you get your energy from. Extroverts get their energy from being around people. If you're more introverted, you'll get your energy from being alone. And generally, if you're more introverted, you'll probably have less people in those inner circles. And if you're more extroverted, you're probably able to hold more people closer to you. So it's just having that awareness. I mean, for me, I know that I can only maintain like a few really close relationships in my life. Like I can't maintain 10 or something, you know, like I can only maintain a few. Yeah, but that's been something that's evolved over time and is just where I'm at now. That might change in the future. Who knows? The other example I wanted to give to you today was I had a beautiful friend who I went to school with, and she was messaging to catch up. I hear from her every now and then as she's following along with my work online, and she was hoping to catch up, and she was asking, like, when are you on the Ninch? When are you in Melbs? Which is so lovely that she did want to catch up. But for me, I had to get honest with myself, and I thought, okay, rather than avoiding this, I could just tell her the truth. And I actually replied saying, hey babe, like it's just a flow of whenever works out for me to go and hang out with my man when I'm in Melbs or with my family when I'm on the Ninch. And I said, I get lots of messages from people asking to hang out. I just have to really respect my time. I know you will understand. And I knew she would understand because she's freaking awesome. But at the same time, in sending that message, I opened myself up to be judged by another for setting a boundary, like for not being open to everyone, you know. When I sent it, I said like a little prayer to myself. I was like, I'm really proud of you and I've got your back, like no matter what the reply is. And there's real freedom in that. Like, this is about being sovereign in who you are and what's most important to you. I ended up getting a lovely message back from her with, I totally understand and thanks for the honesty. And she said, I used to have quite bad obligation guilt. It took me a while to say, not today. Communicating our truth is wholesome and should be celebrated. I do look forward to finding a time where I come to you and fit into your professional schedule. You ever beautiful Ray. So FYI, this is like a dream scenario, right? But this is totally possible when we communicate our truth with love. So we don't have to become like a robot with it. It's just being honest, but we can still deliver that from the heart, you know. Also, FYI, as I said, you do need to be prepared for it to go either way, and you need to be able to hold yourself in however the other person reacts, knowing that if you have communicated your truth, if you have done this from a place of love, then that's all you can do. And how that other person reacts is not your responsibility, really. Being so honest and upfront will not come easily to everyone, and it certainly hasn't to me, but it's something I really like to practice, and I know that I'll have to continue to practice, like the more I share online. We had so many laughs about the whole honesty thing over the weekend. One of my housemate's friends came to visit. I hadn't met her before, and we just started chatting. She was telling me how she works remotely in a small mining town in Queensland. And I had a moment of no filter and just like said what I was really thinking. And I was like, so what are you doing there? Like, are you just doing it for the money? And then I realized that that was probably not like a socially acceptable comment. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't ask it in that way. And she was like, no, straight up is best. I love it. And I replied, oh, are you a Leo? And like, her and my housemate started pissing themselves because she was like, yeah, I am. How did you know? And I'm like, well, I've noticed a real trend in Leos because, yeah, I'm an Aries, but I've always attracted Leos into my life. Like, my sister is a Leo, Matt is a Leo. Many of my close friends from school, Leos, my now housemate, she's a Leo. Like, I bloody love them, even though sometimes their honesty is like quite a shock to me. I'm like, whoa, like, but they have inspired me a lot about how it can be easier to say it how it is in the long run. So yeah, it is a good thing for me to be around, and I learn a lot from them. So as I was saying, like with sharing more online and having people connect with me, I have to continue to reassess boundaries. Like, the truth is I only have space for a handful of my peeps. For my sanity, for my happiness, I need a shitload of time to myself. And the more I'm able to honour that and those boundaries, like the more space and clarity I give for my work, my creativity, the more I cut out like all that diluted energy, like the quantity stuff, the more clear I'm able to be in how I'm sharing and how I'm able to serve. And I have to be honest about those boundaries and be really diligent with it for the sake of my own happiness and my purpose and my peace and, you know, all of that. A couple of weeks ago, Elizabeth Gilbert, she posted a really freaking great post on Instagram. And I wanted to just finish off today's conversation by sharing it because it just sums up how I also feel about boundaries. So she said, your anger is a sign that somebody has crossed a boundary. Your anger will subside as soon as the space between the two of you is correct and appropriate again. She went on to say, I found this note on my phone this morning from last year. This is something that my friend Martha Beck has said to me when I was suffering through a white-hot rage at somebody. It doesn't matter what the incident was or who had brought on the anger. What matters is the understanding and wisdom about how to restore peace. Something I've learned in life is that people who have no boundaries are constantly furious. Furious, victimized, hurt, offended, and outraged. If you cannot figure out how to uphold the healthy, accurate, and appropriate distance between yourself and every person in your life, and it will be a different distance for every person in your life, then you will never know a moment of serenity. Not everybody gets to have full access to you. Trust and intimacy must be earned. People will help you with this project by constantly showing you who they really are. Create your boundaries accordingly. To do anything else is naive and immature. So, who are you furious at today? Now look closely at your history with them. Find the moment when you allowed that person to come closer to you than they had earned the right to come. Now figure out how to re-establish or establish for the first time a wiser boundary. When they are held the correct distance from you, you will stop hating them. Until then, you are just using this person as a weapon to beat yourself up with. Put an end to it. Stand in your dignity and set your own terms. You can do this. Onward. Unquote. Oh my God. Those words are just so powerful. I'm going to put the link to this post in the show notes if you want to have a read over this again. Basically, this just sums up why boundaries are so important, why we need to practice them. They are not selfish. It's not selfish to have boundaries. It's fucking necessary. Thanks for listening in, guys. I hope this episode has been really helpful for you. See you next time.